Okay, so here's the deal. My sister, let's call her Elena, is the epitome of spoiled princess. Always has been. Growing up, everything had to be her way. Or the highway. Seriously, the world revolved around her. Now, she's 30, married to this guy, Mark, who's basically Elena 2.0. Arrogant, entitled, the whole 9 yards. Me, I'm 19, just trying to get through college. After Dad passed, I ended up living with my Aunt Clara because Elena was too busy living her best life to deal with, reality. To make matters even better, Elena and Aunt Clara have always been like oil and water. Elena can't stand that Aunt Clara doesn't just blindly agree with everything she says. Like, there was this one time when Dad was sick and Aunt Clara came over to help. Elena was supposed to be doing the dishes, but instead, she was glued to her phone, texting Mark. Aunt Clara, being the no-nonsense person she is, told Elena to get off her butt and do her chores. Elena rolled her eyes and mumbled something about not being my mom. Aunt Clara just shot back, "No, but I'm not your maid either." Elena did the dishes, but she made sure to slam every single dish as loud as she could. Afterward, she went on and on about how Aunt Clara was always bossing her around. I didn't say anything, but honestly, Aunt Clara was right. Elena just hated that someone could see through her act. This whole dynamic between Elena and Aunt Clara just kept getting worse. Aunt Clara would help Dad with stuff Elena should have been doing, taking him to appointments, helping with bills, making sure he was eating. Elena called it interfering. I called it being a decent human being. Then Mark came along, and Elena's golden child act went into overdrive. He worshipped the ground she walked on, and she loved it. Aunt Clara, of course, saw right through him. She called him arrogant and fake, which, spoiler alert, he was. But Elena didn't care. She acted like he was the best thing since sliced bread and ignored anyone who said otherwise. Mark wasn't just arrogant, he was a total jerk. Every time he came over, he had some snide comment about everything. If Dad made dinner, Mark would say something like, "Well, this is interesting." When I mentioned wanting to go to med school, he'd laugh and say, "Better have a backup plan, kid. Not everyone's cut out for that." Elena never defended me. She just laughed along like his rudeness was some hilarious joke. Aunt Clara, on the other hand, didn't put up with it. She'd shut him down with a sharp comment or just ignore him completely, which drove him crazy. Elena's relationship with Aunt Clara went from bad to worse after she married Mark. She barely showed up to family gatherings, and when she did, it always ended in a dramatic argument with Aunt Clara. I remember one Thanksgiving where Elena started ranting about how some people in the family didn't respect her marriage. Everyone knew she was talking about Aunt Clara, but Aunt Clara just shrugged and said, "Respect is earned, not demanded." Elena stormed out, dragging Mark with her, and we didn't hear from her for months. Through all of this, Aunt Clara was always there for me and Dad. She was like a second parent to me, especially with how much Elena had checked out. While Elena was playing house with Mark, Aunt Clara was helping me with homework, driving me to school, and teaching me how to cook. She never made me feel like a burden, even when I was struggling with everything going on with Dad. Honestly, Elena's hatred for Aunt Clara wasn't really about Aunt Clara at all. It was about Elena. Aunt Clara saw Elena for who she really was, self-centered, manipulative, and not nearly as perfect as she pretended to be. That scared Elena because she couldn't control Aunt Clara the way she controlled everyone else. She couldn't charm her, guilt-trip her, or twist her words. So, instead of dealing with that, Elena just labeled Aunt Clara as the enemy. It's crazy how Elena could hold on to that grudge for so long. Even after she got married and moved out, she'd still find ways to complain about Aunt Clara. She'd say stuff like, "Why does she always have to be involved?" Or, "I can't stand how she treats me like a kid." Meanwhile, Aunt Clara was the one taking care of everything Elena couldn't be bothered with, like making sure Dad was okay. I didn't realize how bad things would get between them until after Dad passed. That's when Elena's dislike turned into something else, something darker. It wasn't just about not liking Aunt Clara anymore. It was about trying to take her down. And trust me, Elena wasn't done yet. Part 2. Dad's Decline. By the time I started college, Dad's health had really started to decline. He'd been dealing with heart problems for as long as I could remember, but it got so bad he couldn't hide it anymore. He'd get winded just walking from the kitchen to the living room, and some days he could barely get out of bed. It killed me to see him like that because Dad was always the strong one, the guy who'd work late shifts and still find time to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. Aunt Clara, of course, stepped in right away. She was always there for us, but now it was different. She started coming over almost every day, helping with everything from doctor's appointments to making sure Dad actually ate. Elena, nowhere to be found. I tried to keep her updated. I'd text her, call her, leave voicemails. Dad's not doing great, I'd say. You should come by and see him. She always had some excuse. Mark's been working late, or I've got so much going on at work. The one that really pissed me off was, let me know if it gets serious. Like, what the hell did she think was happening? Dad was seriously ill, and she couldn't even spare an hour to visit him. I'll never forget the night Dad collapsed in the living room. I was in my room studying when I heard a loud thud. I ran out and saw him on the floor, clutching his chest, his face pale and sweaty. I panicked and called 911, then called Aunt Clara. She got there before the ambulance did, her face tight with worry, but calm enough to keep me grounded. Elena didn't pick up. I left her a message. Dad's going to the hospital. You need to come now. That hospital stay was the beginning of the end. Dad was there for weeks, and every day I hoped Elena would show up. She didn't. Aunt Clara and I were there every day, sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, trying to keep him comfortable. The nurses knew us by name. Elena didn't even bother to call until the second week, and even then it wasn't to ask how Dad was doing. It was to complain about how hard her life was with Mark's health issues. Now, here's the thing about Mark's. He's got some kind of chronic illness. I don't know much about it because we've never been close, but Elena liked to bring it up whenever it was convenient for her. You don't understand how hard it is, she'd say. Mark's been so sick lately. I get it. Being sick sucks, but she was using it as an excuse to ignore what was happening with Dad. The day Dad passed away, it was just me and Aunt Clara in the room. He'd been in and out of consciousness all day, barely able to speak. I held his hand, and Aunt Clara stroked his hair, telling him it was okay to let go. When he finally stopped breathing, it felt like the whole world stopped. I don't think I've ever cried so hard in my life. Aunt Clara stayed with me the whole time, even as I completely broke down. Elena didn't even know until hours later when I finally got through to her. She acted like I was overreacting. Why didn't you tell me it was this serious? She said, her voice all fake concern. I wanted to scream. I had been telling her for weeks. She just didn't care enough to listen. Elena didn't show up for the funeral either. She said something about Mark not feeling well and how she couldn't leave him alone. Aunt Clara and I handled everything, arranging the service, sorting through Dad's stuff, making sure everything was paid for. Elena didn't lift a finger. She sent some flowers and a generic sympathy card, but that was it. I was furious, but I didn't have the energy to fight her. I was too busy trying to process the fact that my dad was gone. A few days after the funeral, Aunt Clara sat me down to talk about what would happen next. Your dad left a will, she said. We'll need to go through it with the lawyer. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm here for you. I nodded, not really understanding what she meant at that point. I wasn't even thinking about the will. I was just trying to get through each day without falling apart. When Elena finally did show up, she acted like nothing had happened. She waltzed into the house like it was just another day, completely ignoring the fact that she'd missed Dad's final moments and his funeral. So, what's going on with the will? She asked, like it was no big deal. Aunt Clara just gave her a cold look and said, We'll find out when we meet with the lawyer. It was obvious from the start that Elena didn't care about anything except the money. She didn't ask about Dad's belongings, his photos, or anything sentimental. She just wanted to know how much she was getting. It made me sick. Aunt Clara, on the other hand, was focused on making sure everything was done the way Dad wanted. She knew how much Dad wanted me to go to med school, and she wasn't going to let Elena ruin that. By the time we sat down with the lawyer, I was bracing myself for the worst. Elena had already made it clear that she didn't think Aunt Clara had any right to be involved, but Dad's will said otherwise. Part 3. The Lawyer's Office. The day we met with the lawyer to go over Dad's will was one of the most awkward days of my life. It wasn't just the sadness of losing Dad, it was knowing that Elena was going to turn the whole thing into a circus. She strolled into the lawyer's office like she owned the place, dressed in some expensive-looking outfit that screamed, "Look at me!" She didn't even bother saying hello to Aunt Clara. She just glanced at me and went, "So, what's the deal? How's this going to work?" The lawyer, Mr. Carter, was an older guy with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He seemed like the type who'd seen it all, which was good because Elena wasn't exactly subtle about her intentions. He started by going through some legal stuff, but all Elena cared about was the money. She interrupted him halfway through to ask, "Can you just skip to the part where we find out what we're getting?" Aunt Clara gave her a look that could have frozen lava, but Mr. Carter just nodded and kept it professional. "Your father's estate will be divided equally between the two of you," he said, 50% to each of you. However, since Ethan is still a minor, his share will be managed by Miss E. Susan, as designated in the will until he turns 21. I swear you could have heard a pin drop. Elena's smile froze on her face, and for a second she just stared at him like she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then, in the fakest voice possible, she said, "Oh, that makes sense, of course. Aunt Clara would be in charge. She's always so responsible." I almost laughed because Elena couldn't have sounded less genuine if she tried. Aunt Clara didn't say anything, but I could tell she was ready for whatever nonsense Elena was about to pull. After the meeting, Elena cornered me in the parking lot. "Hey, just so you know," she said, leaning in like she was about to share some big secret. "You don't have to listen to Aunt Clara about everything. I mean, she's great and all, but we're siblings. We should be making these decisions together." I just nodded, not wanting to start a fight right there, but inside I was fuming. Elena had spent years bad-mouthing Aunt Clara, calling her controlling and overbearing, and now she was trying to act like they were best friends. It was so transparent, it was almost pathetic. Aunt Clara must have seen the look on my face when I got into her car, because as soon as we pulled out of the parking lot, she asked, "What did she say to you?" "Just the usual," I said. "She thinks we should be making decisions together." Aunt Clara sighed, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. I knew this was coming. Elena's never been one to let something like this go. "Listen to me, Ethan. Your father trusted me to manage this money for a reason. He wanted you to have a future, to go to med school, to have the life he dreamed of for you. Don't let her guilt you into giving that up." I nodded, knowing she was right. Elena was way too stubborn to let something like this go without a fight. It didn't take long for her to show her true colors. Over the next few weeks, she started showing up at Aunt Clara's house more often than she ever had before. This was the same Elena who used to avoid family events if Aunt Clara was going to be there, and now she was dropping by unannounced like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd bring pastries or flowers, acting all sweet and charming, but it was so fake it made my skin crawl. "Family is so important," she said one day while sitting in Aunt Clara's living room, sipping tea like she actually cared about anything other than herself. "We've all been through so much, and I just think we need to stick together, you know?" Aunt Clara wasn't buying it. "What do you need, Elena?" she asked bluntly. Elena blinked, her fake smile slipping for just a second before she recovered. "Nothing. Just wanted to check in, see how you two are doing. Is that so bad?" Aunt Clara didn't respond, and the silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Part 4. The Breaking Point. Eventually, Elena stopped pretending and got straight to the point. One afternoon, she showed up at Aunt Clara's house with tears in her eyes and a sob story about Mark's health. Apparently, his chronic illness had taken a turn for the worse, and he needed surgery. Expensive surgery that their insurance wouldn't fully cover. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death," Elena said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But we're desperate. Mark's been so sick and I don't know what else to do. She turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. Please, Ethan, just a small portion of your inheritance. It would mean everything to us. I froze. I didn't know what to say. Mark's health was serious, sure, but this was my inheritance, my future. I'd been saving it for med school, for the life Dad wanted me to have. Giving it to Elena would mean throwing all of that away. Aunt Clara stepped in before I could respond. That money is for Ethan, Elena, she said firmly. It's not for you, and it's not for Mark. Your father made that very clear in his will. Elena's face twisted, her fake sweetness disappearing in an instant. You've always hated me, she snapped. You've been against me since we were kids. This isn't about Dad's wishes. It's about you trying to control everything like you always do. Aunt Clara didn't even flinch. Believe whatever you want, Elena, she said calmly, but that money isn't going anywhere. Elena stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I thought that would be the end of it, but I should have known better. Elena wasn't done, not by a long shot. I thought Elena storming out of Aunt Clara's house would be the last I'd hear from her for a while, but I was wrong. Elena doesn't give up easily, especially when she thinks she's been wronged. The thing about Elena is, she can't stand not being in control. It eats away at her, and when she doesn't get her way, she goes all in, turning the drama up to maximum volume. What I didn't expect was how far she'd take things. It started small, like it always does with Elena. She sent me a couple of texts the day after she left Aunt Clara's, acting all calm and reasonable. Hey, I know things got heated yesterday, she wrote. I just want you to think about what I said. Mark's surgery isn't optional. It's life or death. We're family, and I know Dad would want you to help. I ignored it at first. I didn't want to engage because I knew it wouldn't lead anywhere good. But Elena doesn't take silence as an answer. The next day, she showed up at Aunt Clara's house again, unannounced. I was in my room when I heard the doorbell, followed by Elena's overly loud, overly sweet voice. I want to talk with Ethan, Elena said, trying to sound innocent. It's important. Whatever you have to say, you can say it from the porch, Aunt Clara replied. I peeked through my window and saw Elena standing there, holding a folder like she was about to make some big presentation. Fine, she huffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. I brought some information about Mark's condition. I thought maybe if you both understood how serious this is, you'd reconsider. Aunt Clara didn't say anything, just crossed her arms and waited. Elena took that as her cue to start her pitch. Mark has been dealing with this for years, she began, pulling papers out of her folder and holding them up like they were some kind of evidence. But now it's gotten to the point where he can't function without surgery. The doctors say it's critical. She went on for a while, detailing how expensive the procedure was and how their insurance wouldn't cover everything. We've already put our savings into this, she said, her voice trembling. But it's not enough. I'm not asking for a handout, I'm asking for help. Just a small portion of the inheritance. It's sitting there unused, and Mark doesn't have time to wait. Aunt Clara didn't budge. Elena, I understand that this is hard for you, but your father left that money for Ethan. It's not up for discussion. Elena's face changed instantly. The fake sadness disappeared, replaced by pure anger. You're unbelievable, she snapped. How can you stand there and act like this is about Dad's wishes? You've always hated me. You're just using this as an excuse to punish me. That's enough, Aunt Clara said, her voice icy. You can leave now. Elena didn't argue. She stormed off, slamming the gate behind her. But I knew this wasn't over. Part 5. The Courtroom. A few days later, Elena tried a different approach. She started texting me directly, skipping Aunt Clara altogether. At first, it was more guilt-tripping. I can't believe you're letting Aunt Clara control your decisions like this, one message read. You're old enough to think for yourself. When that didn't work, she switched tactics. You know Mark has always supported you, right? She wrote. He was the one who said you could totally get into med school. He believes in you. I can't believe you're turning your back on him now. That one made me laugh out loud. Mark, the guy who mocked me for wanting to be a doctor, suddenly believes in me? Yeah, right. I didn't bother responding, but Elena didn't stop. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Then came the photo. It was a picture of Mark lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to a monitor. Elena captioned it. This is what you're ignoring. This is what you're letting happen. I showed it to Aunt Clara, who just shook her head. She's trying to manipulate you, she said. Don't fall for it. When the texts didn't work, Elena escalated. One evening, Aunt Clara got a call from someone she hadn't spoken to in years, our cousin, Lauren. Elena had apparently reached out to her and spun some sob story about how Aunt Clara was hoarding my inheritance and refusing to help a dying man. Lauren called to get Aunt Clara's side of the story, and when Aunt Clara explained what was really happening, Lauren was furious. She tried to make me feel guilty for not stepping in to help, she said. What's wrong with her? It wasn't just Lauren. Over the next week, Elena reached out to other family members, trying to rally them against Aunt Clara. She framed it like Aunt Clara was some kind of villain, keeping me under her thumb and refusing to help Mark out of spite. Most people saw through it, but a few bought into it, calling Aunt Clara to express their concern. I couldn't believe how far Elena was willing to go. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about winning. She wanted to break Aunt Clara, to make her cave and give in, just so Elena could feel like she was in control. The breaking point came when Elena showed up at Aunt Clara's house with a lawyer. She didn't warn us, didn't call ahead. She just showed up, demanding to talk. Aunt Clara answered the door but refused to let Elena inside. What do you want now? She asked, exasperated. Elena gestured to the lawyer beside her. I'm filing a legal petition, she said, her tone smug. You've been manipulating Ethan and mishandling the inheritance. I'm asking the court to remove you as custodian and appoint me instead. Aunt Clara didn't even blink. Good luck with that, she said, slamming the door in Elena's face. After that, it was official. Elena wasn't just trying to guilt me into giving her the money, she was trying to take it by force. The court date was set, and Aunt Clara and I started preparing with our lawyer, Mr. Carter. Elena thought she had the upper hand, but she didn't realize how much evidence we had against her. She'd picked the wrong fight, and she was about to find out the hard way. When the court date was set, it felt like the calm before the storm. Elena's legal petition accused Aunt Clara of manipulating me, mishandling the inheritance, and trying to control my life for her own benefit. It was all complete nonsense, but Elena was banking on being able to spin her story well enough to convince the court. If she succeeded, the court would appoint her as my guardian, giving her control of the inheritance until I turned 21. She wasn't asking for part of the money anymore. She wanted all of it. Aunt Clara wasn't rattled. She'd been through enough of Elena's games over the years to know how to stay calm under pressure. We worked closely with Mr. Carter, our lawyer, gathering every piece of evidence we could to show the truth about Elena's motives. Elena arrived at court with her lawyer and Mark in tow. He looked out of place, sitting in the back of the courtroom with a scowl on his face like he'd rather be anywhere else. Elena, on the other hand, was in her element. She walked in like she was the hero of some dramatic story, all fake confidence and exaggerated concern. Her lawyer started by painting her as the caring sister, someone who only wanted what was best for me. My client's sole intention is to protect her brother, the lawyer said. She is deeply concerned about the influence Ms. Susan has over him and believes that the inheritance is not being managed in his best interest. I could feel my blood boiling as I listened. Elena hadn't cared about me or Dad for years, and now she was pretending to be my savior. Aunt Clara must have noticed my clenched fists because she gave me a small nudge, silently telling me to stay calm. When it was our turn, Mr. Carter dismantled Elena's argument piece by piece. He started with the bank records, which clearly showed that Aunt Clara hadn't touched a single cent of my inheritance. The funds are being held in a custodial account as outlined in the will, Mr. Carter explained. There is no evidence of mismanagement or improper influence. Then came the part that completely flipped the narrative. Elena's financial records. Mr. Carter had filed a request for them as part of the case, and the results were exactly what we expected. Elena had blown through her half of the inheritance in just 6 months. There were charges for a brand new SUV, high-end kitchen appliances, luxury vacations, and countless other unnecessary expenses. It painted a clear picture of someone who was financially irresponsible and desperate. Finally, Mr. Carter presented the text messages and voicemails Elena had sent me over the past few weeks. The court listened as her voice echoed through the room, pleading, demanding, and even threatening. "You're sitting on all this money while my husband is dying," one voicemail said. "If you don't help, you're going to regret it." The judge's expression hardened as the evidence piled up. Elena squirmed in her seat, her confidence slipping with every passing minute. Part 6. Justice. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and took a deep breath. This was my chance to tell the truth, and I wasn't going to waste it. "Your Honor," I began, "this case isn't about protecting me or my inheritance. It's about my sister refusing to take responsibility for her own choices. Elena received the exact same inheritance I did. Half of everything my dad worked his whole life to leave us. She spent her share on luxury items and vacations, and now she's trying to take what's left of mine to fix her mistakes." I glanced over at Elena, who was glaring at me with a mix of anger and disbelief. But I didn't stop. Over the past few weeks, Elena has harassed me with messages, tried to guilt me into giving her money, and even involved other family members in an attempt to pressure me. She's not here to protect me. She's here because she wants control. My aunt, on the other hand, has done nothing but support me. She's been there every step of the way, making sure I stay on track for med school and honoring my dad's wishes. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't even be here today. I sat down, my hands shaking slightly, but I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd said everything I needed to say, and there was no taking it back. When Elena got her chance to respond, she doubled down on her sob story. "I've always cared about my brother," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I just want what's best for him. Mark's surgery is life or death, and I thought this family could come together to help. I didn't expect this kind of hostility. It was all so fake it made my skin crawl. Elena had spent years treating Aunt Clara like an enemy, and now she was trying to frame herself as the victim. But the evidence was stacked against her, and it was clear the judge wasn't buying it. After reviewing everything, the judge delivered the verdict. The evidence clearly shows that Ms. Susan has acted responsibly in her role as custodian of the inheritance. Furthermore, the petitioner's financial history and personal communications reveal a motive that is self-serving rather than protective of the respondent's interests. The petition is dismissed. Elena's face turned bright red, her jaw clenched so tightly I thought she might break a tooth. But the judge wasn't done. This court will also investigate whether the petitioner's claims and submitted evidence constitute perjury or fraud. If found guilty, there will be consequences. And there were consequences. After reviewing everything, the court found Elena guilty of filing false claims and attempting to commit fraud. They fined her for wasting court resources, ordered her to go to counseling to deal with her manipulative behavior, and slapped her with a restraining order to keep her away from me and Aunt Clara. I could barely contain my relief. Aunt Clara gave my shoulder a small squeeze, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. As we left the courtroom, Elena tried to catch up to us, but Aunt Clara shut her down with a single look. "We're done here," she said firmly. Elena stopped in her tracks, her hands balled into fists, but she didn't say anything. She knew she'd lost. Mark stayed silent the whole time, probably realizing there was no way to talk his way out of this mess. The two of them left together, Elena muttering angrily under her breath. But I didn't care what she had to say anymore. The fight was over, and we'd won. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like I finally had control of my life again. Aunt Clara and I had stood our ground, and Elena's schemes had backfired spectacularly. She thought she could manipulate me and everyone else to get what she wanted, but in the end, she'd only exposed herself for who she really was. And now, She couldn't touch me or my future. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't pretty, but we made it through. And you know what? I learned a lot about family, loyalty, and standing up for what's right. I also learned that sometimes the people you least expect end up being your biggest supporters. Aunt Clara, I owe you everything. Story 2. My mother-in-law moved into my home, made new regulations, and even tossed away my brother's ashes, according to the title of this story. She wants to see my child now that I'm pregnant, even though I booted her out. Hello, everyone! Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Have you ever encountered someone who, before you even speak, declares their hatred for you? That's Linda, a 53-year-old woman, my mother-in-law. I sensed her coldness as soon as I entered her home. Oh, you don't look like the son I imagined you to be. To be honest, I should have fled at that moment, but instead I stayed. Made an effort to be kind. I'm here to tell you how desperate Linda was to ruin my life, and how I ensured that she would never do it again. Linda has been at this game from day one, so don't assume she hates me now. The moment Ryan took me home to meet her, she began to dislike me. I am Priya, a 28-year-old Indian-American woman who grew up in Chicago. For Linda, I may as well have just stepped off the boat, even though my family has been here for 4 generations. She is the kind of lady who feels her son should have a white girl who is chaste, pious, and attends church. I wasn't any of it. I met a 28-year-old man named Ryan in college. He was the affable, all-American man with the warm eyes and easy chuckle. In addition, I was the girl who could argue with anyone. We clicked right away, and we fell in love quickly after. I was anxious but hopeful when Ryan decided it was time for me to meet his mother. Although I was aware that his family was from a tiny town, I foolishly thought they would recognize me as a dedicated, caring mother who loved their kid. I was mistaken as soon as I entered her home. Although Linda was kind, her manner was cold, phony, and each phrase seemed like a test. "Oh," she replied, smiling a bit too tightly. "You're Priya. I've heard a little bit about you from Ryan. It seemed like a code for all the things I dislike about you. In any case, I tried to create a good impression by smiling." That evening's dinner was a disaster straight out of a romantic comedy. Linda asked me a lot of questions regarding my past. "What are your parents up to?" "They have a modest company, I see. It must be pleasant. Will you be going home frequently?" "At home." She pretended that I hadn't said anything when I informed her that I was born here. The remarks about the cuisine followed. Linda had prepared a tasteless roast with boiling green beans and mashed potatoes. I asked for salt nicely, yet it seemed like I smacked her face. "Do you think it lacks enough flavor?" With a tone brimming with subtle hostility, she inquired. Ryan immediately defended me by claiming that my mother was just accustomed to other types of meals. Although she doesn't provide criticism, Linda wasn't finished. "You used to love this meal when Becky made it for you," she continued, turning to face Ryan. Becky was who the devil. It found out that Ryan's high school love was Becky. Blonde and vivacious, she was the ideal daughter-in-law for Linda. Becky was already married when I first met Linda. Despite this, Linda continued to treat her as though she were still a member of the family. Linda kept bringing her up. According to Becky, she just sent me the cutest card for my birthday. At the grocery store, I ran into Becky. "Tell you," she said. "Hello, Ryan." I initially dismissed it. Linda's obsession with Becky wasn't her fault. However, Linda then began to test limits. When Ryan and I were engaged, Becky texted him one day. It was sufficiently innocent. She was seeking guidance on a project at work, but I couldn't help but suspect Linda was involved. Ryan was unconcerned, but I knew Linda. She was plotting. Everything was revealed a week later. Over dinner, Linda noted in passing, "Oh, Ryan, I gave your number to Becky. I assumed you wouldn't mind because she mentioned that she wanted assistance." I was enraged. "You had no right to do that, Linda," I said, attempting to seem calm. Linda pretended to be innocent as she blinked at me. What's so important? Becky is almost like family. She is not related. Firmly, Ryan said. Furthermore, you must consult Priya and me before making decisions like that. Linda sighed and shifted the conversation, but the harm had already been done. It was about control, not just about Becky. The fact that Ryan was choose me over the life she had envisioned for him infuriated Linda. Linda didn't even act pleased when Ryan proposed. We didn't get a call from her congratulating us. Never inquired about the ring, refused to assist with the wedding. Rather, she ignored our calls and pouted for weeks. She attempted to dissuade Ryan from marrying me when she did speak with him at last. She remarked, "You're hurrying into this. Getting married is a major step. Have you given it enough thought? Ryan would have none of it. I adore Priya, Mom. We're getting married. You have the option to sit or participate. This one is out." Linda grudgingly consented to attend our engagement celebration, but she was obviously unable to act appropriately. She arrived late. Wearing black? Black, indeed. She talked to her cousins all evening about how different the wedding will be, as if she were in mourning. I heard her say to one of her pals, "I just hope Ryan knows what he's doing." At one point, it might be challenging to marry someone from such a different cultural background. I was prepared for everything Linda might throw at me by the time the wedding arrived, or so I believed. Everything was a scene for her. The cuisine, the music, and the guest list. "Does the reception really need to serve Indian food?" she questioned Ryan. "Shouldn't we just serve something neutral like potatoes and steak?" "Quickly shut that down, Ryan. This is also Priya's wedding, Mom." Finally, we are enjoying Indian cuisine. On the wedding day itself. By dressing in a lavish black gown that seemed more appropriate for a movie premiere than a family wedding, Linda attempted to outdo me. In the pictures, she declined to grin. Left the reception early without saying farewell and hardly spoke to my parents. Even though it stung, I'm not going to let her spoil my day. The only thing that mattered was that Ryan and I were married. After 3 years, I believed that the worst of it was behind us. Ryan and I had learnt to ignore Linda's passive-aggressive remarks, but she still made them every time she came to visit. Together, we were creating a nice life in our little house. Then, there was the turmoil surrounding Linda's condo HOA. She had apparently been at odds with her neighbors for months, something regarding fence heights and property lines. One day, sobbing, she contacted Ryan and asked for a place to stay until she worked things out. Since Ryan is a good-hearted person, he volunteered to let her move in for a short time while she looks for another apartment. "I know it's a lot to ask, but she's my mum," he remarked. I let out a groan, already fearing what lay ahead. "Okay, but Ryan, you have to establish limits. This is not her house. It's ours." He said he would, but it's easy to make promises. Retaining them? That is a whole other matter. I knew I was in danger when Linda arrived at our house. She had already interrupted my life with her views and sense of entitlement. However, this was not like the others. She wasn't simply stopping by this time. She was relocating. Like she was getting ready for a year-long trip, her van was crammed full with boxes, bags, and other home belongings. I moaned as I peered out the window. "Tell me, Ryan, she didn't bring her whole house." Already frustrated, Ryan massaged his temples. I assured her that it was only temporary. Like she always does, she's most likely just packing too much. Either temporary or not. This seemed like the start of a bad dream. As like she owned the place, Linda walked in with ease. Her gaze lingered a little too long on my baggy hoodie and leggings as she gave me a once-over. "Oh, you appear at ease, Priya." Her voice brimmed with condemnation as she spoke. "It's good to see you, Linda." I forced a grin in response. Ryan assisted her in carrying her belongings, which included 6 large suitcases, 3 fragile boxes, and a laundry basket with blankets and throw cushions. She started looking about the house right away, as if she were doing a real estate evaluation. She ran her fingers over the back of the couch and said, "You've changed the furniture since I was last here." "It's contemporary. Although it's not really my style, I suppose it suits you as well. It works." I resisted the impulse to roll my eyes as I spoke. Then she walked into the kitchen and opened drawers and cabinets without asking. "You still have that spice rack, Priya. It's really time for you to obtain something more impartial. This one is blatantly ethnic. With clenched teeth, I answered, "Because it's mine." Ryan gave me a pitying glance, but Linda didn't notice. She was too busy moving things around in my kitchen. I escorted Linda to the guest room we had set up for her after she had completed her tour of the home. With a full-sized bed, clean sheets, and a tiny desk near the window, it was compact but comfortable. "It's this." She wrinkled her nose and inquired, "This is the guest room indeed," I answered. She entered, making a leisurely round as if she were inspecting a cell in a prison. "It's really little." "Are you certain there isn't anything larger? There isn't another room available?" I remarked, attempting to seem neutral. "How about the workplace?" Pointing down the hallway, she questioned. "I strongly said that we operate in the office, which is far smaller than this place." With a theatrical sigh, she collapsed on the bed. "I'll have to get a nicer mattress, but I guess I'll get by. This is really too rigid." I said that the mattress was brand new. "I'm getting tired of guests," she retorted. "Not for a long-term resident. Short-term." She was corrected by Ryan. "Mom, you're only here for a while." She disregarded him. It became evident in a matter of hours that Linda would not simply settle in peace. She began unpacking right away, putting so many of her belongings in the guest room that it appeared as though she was establishing a permanent home. She brought in a little coffee machine since evidently walking to the kitchen was too cumbersome, strung up her own drapes, and changed the bedding I had put out with her own more comfy set. However, it didn't end there. It was a habit of Linda's to treat each room as though it were her own. She would leave her mail on the kitchen counter, her shoes in the hallway, and her coffee cup on the table in the living room. She seemed to be demarcating her area. She was moving the framed pictures on our bookshelves when I walked downstairs one evening. She had shifted a wedding day photo of Ryan and me to the back of the shelf and swapped it out with a prom picture of Ryan and Becky from high school. "What are you doing, Linda?" My voice was hardly steady as I asked. "Oh," she answered with an innocent smile. "I was just cleaning up." "Don't you think this photo of Ryan and Becky is much better?" I grabbed the picture and shoved it back into the drawer where it belonged, saying, "No, I don't." Our wedding pictures remain in their current location. Linda sighed as though I were the one who was being unreasonable. "Priya, you're really sensitive. It's only an image." "This is my house!" I yelled. Almost instantly, the kitchen turned into a battlefield. My passion has always been cooking, and Ryan adores the food I make. She had an issue with everything I created, though, Linda. "Are you cooking again, Priya?" One evening, she wrinkled her nose at the scent of coriander and cumin. The scent of spices permeates the entire home. Dinner smells in the air. As I stirred the curry pot on the burner, I spoke. "Well," she responded, "perhaps you could open a window next time. These odors shouldn't stick to the walls." When Ryan heard, he intervened. "Priya's food is fantastic, Mom. You can refuse to eat it if you don't like it." Linda appeared irritated as she crossed her arms. "All I'm trying to say is, Ryan, I'm not sure how you can cope with all that heat. Your stomach has always been so sensitive." "I don't," Ryan stated emphatically. Linda wasn't finished, though. She began recommending simpler dishes. "Reed may be blanded by me. How about preparing a simple dish like meatloaf? Or a lovely dish, perhaps. Becky used to make them, and Ryan loved them. Once more, it was there. Becky." Despite all these years, Linda was unable to stop talking about Becky. She seemed to believe that Ryan would miraculously alter his attitude about me if she talked about her enough. I was baking one day when Linda entered the kitchen while Ryan was away. Leaning on the counter, she added nonchalantly, "I saw Becky the other day." I responded, not looking up from the dough. "Good for her." I was kneading. "She's doing great," Linda said. "She just received a raise at work, and she said that she still occasionally thinks about Ryan." I stopped in mid-knead and froze my hands. "Linda, what are you trying to say?" "Oh, nothing," she answered in an unduly pleasant voice. "I simply find it admirable that she still has feelings for him. You know, she played such a significant role in his life." I turned to her after dropping the dough onto the counter. "Linda, I'm married to Ryan. Becky is married as well. She has never been and never will be a part of his life. Therefore, don't bother if you're intending to stir up trouble. After a brief moment of hesitation, Linda's smile returned. Why you're being so defensive is beyond me. I'm simply thinking back on that evening. I told Ryan everything. He was enraged. She mentioned Becky once more. With his mouth clenched, he asked. She did, of course. She has been attempting to discredit me ever since she arrived, I said. I will speak with her. Ryan said he would. This is going too far. However, talking was insufficient. I was beginning to feel alienated in my own house as Linda dug her claws in. It felt like forever even though Linda had only been living with us for a few days. Although I was aware that things would worsen before they improved, I was unaware of the extent to which she would go to undermine me. I was already on the verge of going insane when Linda made the decision to ruin my cupboard. With her, there was a new insult or passive-aggressive remark every day. She treated me like an inexperienced cleaner who had inadvertently entered her son's life and my house like a badly run hotel. Nevertheless, I made an effort to maintain harmony for Ryan's sake. I reminded myself that it was just temporary and that she would soon grow bored and go. However, what transpired that morning made it quite evident. Linda wasn't only challenging, her goal was to completely destroy me. I felt abnormally hopeful when I woke up. Ryan loves biryani, so I was going to cook it for supper. Additionally, I had spent the previous evening marinating the chicken and preparing the seasonings. I always felt in control while I was cooking, and I needed that little win because of Linda's continual shenanigans. However, my heart fell when I entered the kitchen. All my neatly arranged shelves were empty, and the pantry door was ajar. I initially believed I was seeing things. I massaged my eyes, blinked, and opened the cabinet once again in the hopes that the spices would come out of thin air. They didn't. I've lost my rice dispenser. I kept the sacks of wheat, the jars of lentils, and even the tiny jars of dried herbs for special occasions. It was all gone. I examined the refrigerator in panic. The tale was the same. I had stocked up on veggies, yogurt, and paneer, but it was all gone. A loaf of bread, some eggs, a stick of butter, and a carton of milk were all that remained. The realization struck me, and I stood still. My kitchen had been wiped out. A few minutes later, still half sleeping, Ryan walked into the kitchen. "Good morning," he stated as he picked up a coffee mug. "Are you all right? You appear pallid. The food is all gone." My voice trembled as I asked. Ryan scowled while examining the refrigerator and pantry. "I don't know. Was it moved before I could respond?" With her coffee cup in hand, Linda entered the room as if she hadn't already broken into my pantry. She grinned as she glanced at Ryan and then at me. "Oh, you noticed?" she murmured, as if she were anticipating appreciation. "Have you noticed anything? I lost my temper." I tidied up the kitchen. Putting down her cup, she spoke. "Everything you had, including those strange spices and other items. It simply wasn't appropriate. That type of meal is unfamiliar to Ryan. I decided it was time to make a new beginning." Ryan's mouth fell open. "What did you do?" Linda gave a shrug. I tossed it aside. In addition to taking up a lot of room, the scent was rather overwhelming. "You may now buy regular groceries." "Typical groceries?" I said, raising my voice. "That was food worth hundreds of dollars, Linda. How long did it take me to stock all of that? Do you know?" Not even Linda flinched. "Oh, Priya, stop being so theatrical. More can be purchased. In addition, I've already compiled a list of the goods we truly require. Chicken breasts, canned soup, and potatoes." "Real food, you know," Ryan interrupted, his tone piercing. "You had no right to handle any of that, Mom. Priya's kitchen is this. What were you contemplating? I was considering your well-being." With her arms crossed, she spoke. "Those spices, all of them. What they're doing to your gut is unknown. All I'm doing is watching out for you." "You're not," Ryan retorted. "Again, you're treating Priya disrespectfully." However, Linda wasn't paying attention. In this case, she had already determined that she was the victim, and she was not going to change her mind no matter what we said. Linda confessed, and I raced out of the home. I instructed Ryan to stay and deal with his mother, even though he offered to accompany me to the grocery shop. To be honest, I didn't trust myself to be polite to her at that moment, so I needed to calm down. My mood didn't get any better at the grocery shop. My aggravation grew as I made my way down the aisles. None of the spices, lentils, or bags of basmati rice were present. Linda had thrown some out, and I had to replace them. Even if canned groceries and frozen dinners were plenty on the stores, things weren't the same. The fact that some of those things were irreplaceable just made it worse. I couldn't just buy several of the ingredients Linda had thrown out at the neighborhood grocery store. During my parents' and friends' visits from India, I received the majority of the masala dry herbs and specialty foods. Every time my mother visited, she brought a care package for me, packed with pickles, dried red chilies, and handmade spice mixes. I was unable to locate it. They were more than simply food. They represented fragments of home, little reminders of my origins. Even though I was able to locate several Indian components nearby, every time it was a pain. The closest Indian supermarket was more than an hour distant, and their inventory fluctuated. I occasionally make the long commute just to discover that they are out of asafoetida or turmeric. Additionally, I had to rely on internet retailers when I was unable to travel, which came with expensive shipping costs and the uncertainty of whether the things would arrive fresh. My mom sent me a little container of garam spice last year, and I pondered about it. It was a spice combination of her own creation. She ground herself and toasted. Like a can of paprika, Linda had most likely thrown it in the garbage without giving it any attention. It was more than simply an ingredient in the container. My mother gave it to me as a present. She knew I couldn't duplicate it here, so she crafted it with love. As I pushed my cart through the store, I could feel my throat constricted. How could someone have such a lack of consideration? Was Linda even aware of the damage she caused? Or did she simply not give a damn? I took hold of what I could. A loaf of bread, some spaghetti, and canned tomatoes. However, it was very different from the colorful, tasty dishes I was accustomed to preparing. It seemed more than simply a hassle when my go-to items were not available. I felt as though a piece of myself had been removed. Linda was reading a magazine on the couch when I arrived home. As I passed her carrying the groceries, she didn't even raise her head. "Have you gotten all you require?" In a casual manner, she questioned, as if she hadn't just destroyed my kitchen. "No," I responded bluntly. "You'll manage, I'm sure." As she turned a page, she said, "You're resourceful." I walked upstairs to cool up after slamming the pantry door. Ryan and I had a conversation that evening. He could see she needed to go, and I was still furious. Without trying to sugarcoat things, I said, with a groan, Ryan combed through his hair. "I am aware that what she did was totally inappropriate, Priya. It's unacceptable. I've told her already. The groceries aren't the only thing at stake." My voice trembled as I spoke. "Ryan, she doesn't respect me. She has been upfront about it from the beginning, and now she is acting as though I am a visitor in my own house." Ryan gave a nod. "You're correct. She has gone too far too often. Tomorrow, I'll give Lisa a call to see if she can take her in." Lisa, a woman of 32, Linda had been invited to stay with his sister when the whole thing began. However, Linda had declined. "My buddies are too far away." "At the time," she had stated. "She can't remain here then." I spoke aggressively. "Not after this." Ryan sat Linda down for a serious conversation the next morning. In order to avoid being involved in the dispute, I remained upstairs. I was able to hear some of what they were saying, but not all of it. "Mom, you can't simply discard someone else's meal. It's not your home. You must be mindful of our personal space. You'll have to go if you can't." With each phrase, Linda's voice became louder. I was only attempting to assist. She yelled, "And you're kicking me out now? Following everything that I have done for you." Ryan remained composed, yet resolute. "Mom, we won't toss you out. Lisa has already expressed her happiness in having you. There is no question about it." Linda was furious at the conclusion of the talk. She shut the door to her bedroom and stayed inside the remainder of the day. Ryan and I sat down to a straightforward supper of canned soup and spaghetti that evening. It was sufficient, even if it wasn't what I had intended. Ryan reached for my hand and murmured, "I'm sorry you had to deal with this. I swear that this won't occur once again." I gave a nod. Although I was appreciative of his help, I knew deep down that Linda wouldn't pass away peacefully. She didn't. To put it mildly, the days ahead would be fascinating. Linda had more than simply entitlement. She was vindictive. What started off as a furious assault of my kitchen turned into something I never imagined even she could do. I was exhausted from the pantry incident, but I made an effort to overlook it for Ryan's sake. Then, a few days later, something occurred that completely altered the situation. In our living room, I had a little, exquisitely carved wooden box on the mantel. It held the ashes of my older brother, Arjun, who died 5 years ago in a vehicle accident. The most difficult thing my family and I had ever gone through was losing him, and it was comforting to have that little bit of him around me. Though basic, the box held great meaning for me. My parents had given it to me as a token of their appreciation for Arjun. They had given me some of his ashes to keep near, as they knew I couldn't regularly visit his grave. I discovered the box was missing one evening while cleaning the living room. Thinking it could have been pushed aside, I looked at the mantel, but it wasn't there. I started to panic as I looked on the coffee table, the bookshelf, and even the floor. "Ryan!" With a trembling voice, I shouted out, "The box is where—" "The mantel-mounted one." Ryan frowned as he entered the room. "Which box?" "The one that contained Arjun's ashes," I said. My heart is racing. His expression dropped. "I'm not sure. It ought to be present." Linda entered at that moment, drinking her tea nonchalantly. Why all the commotion? With a very unimpressed expression, she questioned, "There is no box containing my brother's ashes." I turned to her and spoke. "Did you see it?" Her face remained unchanged. "That old stuff, huh?" I assumed it was some sort of ornamental item. While dusting, I relocated it. Perhaps one of the drawers contains it. I looked in every drawer, shelf, every nook and cranny of the space. Nothing. "Linda!" My voice shook with rage as I spoke. "What location is it? This goes beyond just adornment. It's the ashes of my brother. If it was moved, tell me the location." She pretended to be innocent as she stared at me. "Really, Priya, I have no idea. Perhaps you lost it." "Lost it?" I said it again, raising my voice. "Linda, nothing was lost by me. It's gone now, but it was on the mantel. Have you thrown it away?" She put on her phony grin after her face stiffened for a while. "Why would I do that? It's really theatrical of you. It will appear somewhere, I'm sure." However, it didn't. I had trouble sleeping that night. Nothing Ryan said could make up for what had been lost, despite his best efforts to console me. I had a visceral feeling that Linda had thrown the package away out of malice. Her attempts to eradicate my cuisine and customs were insufficient. She desired to remove me from existence. Ryan addressed her mother the following morning. "Have you disposed of the ashes of Priya's brother?" Linda let out a gasp and clenched her chest as if the idea were offensive. "How could you say such a terrible thing about me? I would never act in that way. So where is it?" Ryan applied pressure. "I'm not sure." She lost her temper. Priya may not have as excellent of a recall as she believes. The last straw for us both was her unwillingness to confess. Ryan and I had a conversation that evening. I had never seen him so furious. "I know she did it, Priya. I know she must go, but she will never acknowledge it." I spoke aggressively. "I can't live like this, Ryan. Someone who disrespects me is not someone I can live with. My family, my culture. Someone who would ruin something that valuable." Ryan gave a nod. "She is no longer there. Tomorrow I'll give Lisa a call and tell her to come collect Mom. If she declines to visit Lisa, we'll figure something other out. She's not going to remain here, though." One more day. The news did not sit well with Linda. In an attempt to guilt-trip him by bringing up his early years, she said that we had abandoned her and were unappreciative of everything she had done for Ryan. Ryan, however, remained steadfast. "Mom, you've gone too far," he remarked. "Family is no longer the focus of this. Respect is at issue, and you haven't displayed any. By the end of the week, you must depart." Linda had left. In an effort to get rid of the stress and poison she had brought with her, Ryan and I cleaned the house for hours. However, her axe had left scars, even if she was no longer physically present. I was troubled by the loss of my brother's ashes. Each time I passed the mantel, I had a pain in my chest. Ryan did everything he could to comfort me, but nothing could repair the harm Linda had done. The day Linda left our home, she moved in with Ryan's sister, Lisa. God bless her, Lisa didn't know what she was getting herself into. She had heard tidbits of what had transpired, but she thought it was just normal family drama. She was not yet aware of the extent of Linda's avarice and hatred. We didn't hear from Linda at first. No attempts to get in touch, no texts, no calls. I felt a sense of relief. I didn't want to listen to her make-believe or justifications, but I knew Linda too. She didn't like to be silent. She was too arrogant to remain silent indefinitely, but she was also too obstinate to acknowledge her mistakes. We received a call around 2 weeks after Linda and Lisa moved in together. But it wasn't from Linda. Lisa sent it. "Can I speak with you, Priya?" Lisa sounded uncertain, as if she wasn't sure how to start. "Of course," I said. My heart is sinking. After a lengthy silence, Lisa resumed her conversation. "I believe you should know what Mom told me. I prepared myself. What is it?" She acknowledged that she had thrown out the box containing your brother's ashes. Lisa spoke haltingly, seeming as though she was having trouble pronouncing the words. I tightened my hold on the phone as I froze. "What is she? She claimed to have done it intentionally." Lisa went on, her voice full of disdain. "The fact that you and Ryan were forcing her to go disturbed her. She believed that by refusing to let her remain in your house, you were being disrespectful to her. She therefore made the decision to speak up." My palms curled into fists and my heart thumped. In some sort of retaliation, she tossed away my brother's ashes. With each syllable, my voice rose as I begged. "Yes," Lisa answered, trembling. "After cleaning the cupboard," she informed me. "Despite her desire to harm you, she claimed to know what the box was. She believed that kicking her out would teach you a lesson." My breath came in short gasps, and I could feel the blood in my veins boiling. Desecrate my brother's remains and teach me a lesson. How could somebody act in such a horrible way? Lisa's voice broke. "I'm not sure, Priya. What's wrong with her is beyond me. I was unable to even look at her when she informed me. She dismissed my comment that she was repulsive as if it were insignificant. She is a monster." My voice trembled with anger as I spoke. "Thank you for letting me know, Lisa, but I don't want to ever interact with her again. I think she's dead." Lisa let out a sigh. "I get it. In addition, I don't believe she should be pardoned for this. There is no forgiveness for what she did." After saying thank you, I hung up and sat quietly. Linda's brutality was weighing heavily on me. This went beyond simply crossing a queue. It was the height of treachery. Not only had Linda treated me disrespectfully, my sorrow, my culture, and my family were all desecrated by her. There was no way out of this. Slowly, life started to go on. Ryan and I concentrated on repairing our relationship and our house. Eliminating Linda from our life just strengthened us since we were stronger than before. Then, a few months later, an amazing event took place. I discovered I was expecting a child. I was elated at the news, something I hadn't experienced in years. Ryan was overjoyed, and we spoke for hours about nursery designs, baby names, and the types of parents we wanted to be. The future seemed bright for the first time in a long time. At first, we chose to keep the pregnancy a secret. I only told my family and a select group of close friends about the news. I wanted Linda to know nothing, at least not yet. I was prepared for her eventual effort to re-enter our life, but I also knew how she would respond. Sadly, secrets aren't kept that way for very long. Linda somehow learnt of the pregnancy. I don't blame Lisa for letting it slip, but I assume she did so during one of their chats. Linda has a knack for extracting information from others. An email was the first indication of problems. I just received the amazing news, dear Ryan and Priya. I'm ecstatic to have grandchildren. Tell me how I may be of assistance during this wonderful time, please. I would be delighted to visit and discuss the infant. Mom, love? I didn't reply. Therefore, I erased the email. Ryan shook his head after reading it over my shoulder. She's incredible, he whispered. The emails evolved into texts, which were followed by phone conversations. Linda tried everything, including playing the victim, apologizing, and guilt trips. In one message, she remarked, "Since I moved out, I've been so lonely. For the baby's sake, can't we simply get over this? After all, I'm still Ryan's mother. However, I couldn't forgive Linda for what she had done. Disrespect was not the only reason I threw away my brother's ashes. That was a horrible deed. I could go on with my life, but I couldn't allow her to re-enter it. Linda's efforts to re-establish contact grew increasingly urgent as my pregnancy went on. Baby clothing, toys, and even a blanket she claimed to have hand-knitted, albeit one that still had the price tag on it, were among the items she sent home. We sent everything back unopened. Linda unexpectedly knocked on our home one evening. I remained hidden in the living room while Ryan responded. "Why have you come here, Mom?" Ryan's voice was icy as he inquired. Linda responded, "I just wanted to see you." "What about Priya and the infant? The hump, I suppose." "We don't have you here," Ryan replied firmly. "You must go." However, Linda's voice cracked as she continued, "I'm your mother. I can't be excluded from my grandchild's life." Ryan didn't falter. "When you tossed away the ashes of Priya's sibling, you closed yourself off. The final straw was that, we're finished, Mom." Ryan refused to back down despite Linda's attempts to persuade. She eventually departed, but not before crying. One more instance of guilt tripping. We kept the birth of our daughter Maya, a secret from Linda. Eventually she learned, most likely from Lisa. However, we were aware of our limits at that point. Maya would be raised in a household that valued compassion, love, and respect rather than poison and deceit. Over the years, Linda made a few more attempts to get back in touch, but we never allowed her to. Some injuries are too severe. Furthermore, it's not always feasible to forgive. Rather, we concentrated on creating a life that reflected the principles we held dear. Despite the fact that Maya will never meet her uncle Arjun, I made sure she knew about him as a child. Stories, pictures, and a new box on the mantle, this time with letters and recollections, helped us preserve his memory. A remembrance of the sibling I lost, but will always remember. And as I observed Maya's development, I knew we had made the proper decision since we were surrounded by affection and no longer under Linda's shadow. Not all relationships are worth repairing, and sometimes the finest starts are the ends.